Welcome, one and all, to the Ferret and Raccoon podcast, episode 191. I am your one and only host for this podcast, the Angry Raccoon, bringing you the first podcast of May 2022. And boy, have the last 2 weeks been interesting to say the least. A bit stressful as well at the same time, given a lot of the current events currently happening and have happened over the last few days. It's all a bit dizzying, it's all a bit stressful, and it hasn't really helped in terms of where I am right now. For a little bit of context, without actually giving said context, things have been a bit stressful in terms of my life, more my personal life to be more accurate. Things and situations keep shifting and keep changing. I'm not going to go into details, but essentially my plans will get changed because I need to now go and do something, and then those plans on the day or just before they're about to happen get changed once again. So it's incredibly disorientating, or it has been incredibly disorientating over the last few weeks for me to really get anything done. I mean, for example, I completely forgot about the fact that in May, it's usually Anime, where we talk about anime for both podcasts that are during May. And yeah, I just forgot about that. I forgot about a lot of things, and to be honest, I really wasn't on the internet over the last, I would say, at least 5 days. I don't really know what's going on, and to be honest, I almost actually don't care in regards to some matters. There are some matters I do care about, like the unfortunate and current war still going on in Ukraine, which is just, still the worst thing ever, and I'm just still hoping, still praying that that gets sorted as soon as possible. But, I think is light at the end of the tunnel, and I think it's coming very soon. At least that's what I'm going to say to myself, and I think everyone else needs to be that positive as well. But I did manage to get a few things done, not things that I am ready to talk about because I'm in the middle of playing a game, watching a series, and a couple of other projects I'm working on at the moment. So yeah, it's been a weird week, or series of weeks, fortnight, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, let's get on with the podcast, as we have another weird and interesting one. It's short, but there is a lot to discuss, and I guess there's a lot to maybe be excited about. Not necessarily regarding the first thing I'm going to talk about, because we are once again talking about Netflix as they continue to fuel the fire of their demise, as it's now been unfortunately confirmed that the company has laid off an unknown number of employees in a lot of marketing roles regarding the company. Most notably people who worked for the Tadum, I believe that's how you say it. It's essentially the sound that is made whenever a Netflix show starts. The Tadum website, which is owned by Netflix and serves to essentially advertise and promote their programs, a lot of people were let go because of that, which is really upsetting to hear about, because obviously it's sad news for those who have lost their jobs, and I really do hope that they can find work as soon as possible in these really tough times. I can mainly speak for myself, given that, for anyone who is outside of England, England is currently facing a bit of a financial crisis, with a lot of things rising in prices as a result of us leaving Europe. Yeah, people are struggling and prices are noticeably going up, and there's a massive shortage of, well, not massive, there is a slight shortage of things given how the state of the world is. And yeah, our government has just, blase addressed it, but that's a topic for another time, or for other people to scream and shout about. But yeah, it is frustrating because their layoffs are based on the fact that Netflix is in panic mode at this point. In my opinion, they're not thinking about the actions they're making. They're just making rash decisions, which will result in negative reception, or even more negative reception, and a even greater loss of subscribers, because I think, it's not confirmed, I think one of the main reasons why they lost, over 200,000 subscribers in the first place is simply because of them potentially implementing that no password sharing system or rule, or I don't really know what that is, and if they even can properly enforce that. It's a very malicious concept at the end of the day when you think about it. And I know it's pessimistic to think like this, but I look at all these shows, especially the newer shows that they've just confirmed, and I just think to myself that they're going to cancel them because they won't achieve boss baby numbers, which was something we talked about on the previous podcast, how they talked about the fact that the Boss Baby cartoon is like the perfect example of what a Netflix show is, which is still a ridiculous and ludicrous concept when you think about it. Even if it wasn't, something as meme worthy as the Boss Baby, it's still just disheartening to think about it, especially when you look at the show. And I hope people have looked at that show, because my gosh, I mean, this is the standard and rule they've established for themselves. I honestly feel sorry for the people who have worked on these newer projects, because they've worked their arse off to make these shows, and they've most likely read and seen these articles and this news about how they've just been cancelling mass amounts of animated series, and they're probably worried about their own series and job now, given that it most likely is now on the chopping block, because if it doesn't perform those Boss Baby numbers, then it's worthless in their eyes. And it does come back to another problem regarding them turning their backs on creative and varied animation, which I still think is a core problem with what Netflix is going about. They are just trying to shift the blame, or their own blame, onto something that isn't really the result of, lack of numbers or money or whatever it is going on over there. And that is that Netflix, at least now, they only seem to deem animation as something for children. And yes, you can give a child an iPad that's playing one of their series, provide them with snacks, as they'll probably happily sit there and binge watch the series. And once the series is finished, I'm sure if you ask them, they'll tell you that the show was good. But here's the thing. Once they finish that series, I'm sure they're not going to hop onto Twitter and tell the world how good the series are. Children aren't like that. Children can't do that. Sure, word of mouth is a great marketing tool, but children can't advertise your product. And this is my point. When you limit animation to be just for children, it's unlikely you'll grow an audience past that. And again, it might even be a great show, but no one's going to talk about it, especially adults or fans like myself of animation. When you put that stamp and say, this is what a children's show should look like, or this is a children's show, you're basically condemning a show to be nothing more than just that. And this is where Netflix is really going to mess up in the long run. Sure, they can license and put in the money to all these other animated projects, but people will stop trusting them when they start to have a reputation of funding these things only to, say, needs to be child friendly, or it didn't do that well, you're cancelled, get out of my face. It's annoying to a lot of regards, and I am going to reference an article that does talk about the more current layoffs, as well as the animated shows that they are currently, I guess, promoting, weirdly enough, which feels like a really hypocritical move for them to be like, yeah, look at all these great new animated shows, after cancelling 10 of them or something like that, maybe even more, I'm not too sure, as part of their sort of Netflix after school program block. I don't really know what their intention is behind this promotion to some extent. And to talk about some of these newest series or shows, the Samurai Rabbit Usagi Chronicles is a weird but interesting one, because from my understanding, it's loosely based on the Yosaki Yojimbo comics or series, and the series kind of takes place in the future and focuses on Miyamoto Usagi, who's a descendant of, the original character. Yeah, I believe he is Miyamoto Usagi. Yeah, no, he is. Yeah, sorry, I got my information mixed up. Yeah, the main character in Yosaki Yojimbo is Miyamoto Usagi, and this series is focusing on his descendant, grandson, whatever, despite looking exactly like him and having almost no real, at least from the trailer, understanding of or knowledge of his own, father, grandfather, whatever's legacy. It's a bit odd. I have no idea why they didn't just make an animated series on the original. My guess is that they wanted the rights to a popular series, like they always do, but wanted a kid-friendly version of said series. The character designs are nice in this series, but I'm not a fan of the voice acting just from the trailer alone. I'm not saying it's bad. I don't think the voice acting is bad at all. It feels like they've been told to talk like that because it's a children's show and you got to talk slow and clear because children are too stupid to understand what is being said. which is another thing I don't like about how people go about making media for children or how they regard animation once again. That may not be the case, but it certainly does feel like that, and there's enough of a, how should I put it? There's enough evidence for me to suggest that may be the case, but let's hope not. And I guess we can talk about the fact that they also showed off a few seconds from the new Sonic series titled Sonic Prime. And you'd think that with Amazon Prime being like their main competitor, they would use a different name. I mean, that's just something I found funny, but yeah, Sonic's design in this looks kind of wonky. I really do hope that that's concept footage, because yeah, no, there's something wrong with his model. It looks like there's I'm not an expert on these kinds of things, but it looks like something is missing from his model, or the rigs or the points in which his limbs or certain parts of his body animate. It looks like it's missing something. It looks odd. It's an odd design for Sonic. I'm not saying it's like god awful, but there's just something not quite right about how Sonic looks in this, and I'm not even like the biggest Sonic fan, so hey, I'm sure children will sit there and watch it, but they certainly won't be telling me it's good. Next trailer, we've got a few to talk about, and the first one is going to be for Bodies, 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 which is another film that A24 Pictures are going to be distributing, and this was an interesting one because it seems to be a cross between, I guess, Truth or Dare / I guess a slasher horror film to some extent, but for the modern age, which is what all the quotes are bragging about, how it's like so new and so fresh and you'll never guess the twist. And yeah, it's always nice to see modern takes on classic film genres, but this film runs the risk of being too current to the point where it comes across as try-hard. Now, I don't think this film is try-hard necessarily, but this is why you don't focus too much on or establish a time setting in older films, or this is why you don't do it, because a lot of these older films that are, it's never explicitly stated where it takes place, they're ironically timeless. You could watch them back then and they were great, and you can watch them today or in the future and they're still going to work. Just a random example I can think of is Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, Edgar Wright's directed film. That film's still going to hold up and be relevant and still work 20 years from now, because the film doesn't slap you in the face with, current terms and terminology, or, go, oh, it takes place in 2009 where this was happening and he was president and this was going. No. Granted, this film isn't doing that, but it does have a weird... Yeah, there's something off about this film once again. Like, I can see this film having a repetitive nature in terms of, they play the game, they go around, someone gets killed, and it kind of seems like they're just going to be arguing throughout most of this film. Sure, the dialogue does feel natural, but a lot of it just seems like it's just trying to pay tribute too much to how real characters speak. And sure, it doesn't seem awkward in some example, but it feels like it's just going to go on and on and on with these quips and lines, and with the extent... I guess with the intentions of being like, oh, that's just how people speak. But the film itself does look fun to some extent. It does have a nice kind of aesthetic. I do like these sort of neon lighting, or the glow sticks that they use earlier in the series. Hopefully they really utilize that in terms of some of these scenes, and maybe even some of the murders, or whatever you want to call it. I know there is sort of like a drug-induced element with this film, so I'm sure that plays into the twist of like, who's really behind the killings and some stuff. And Pete Davidson's in the film as well, which I'm sure for a lot of people that's either great or problematic, but it doesn't actually seem like he's acting in this film. It seems like he's just playing himself, which, I don't know, you can either take that or leave it. But yeah, it looks interesting. I hope to hear good things about it. But next film we're going to talk about, and we're still continuing to be a bit weird, is for the film Don't Worry Darling, which is a film that is not directed by Jordan Peele. It's not being directed by Jordan Peele, but it has the same vibes, just less interesting, unfortunately. I guess the base premise is that it is going to be focusing more commentating on the whole women stay at home, men go out and work, that's how it should be kind of period in Western history, which is fine. It's an interesting concept. It's not as if this has never been done before, because it has, both in, TVs, films, and in video games to some extent. So there's nothing really new about that. I mean, even WandaVision, to some extent, you could say, referenced and parodied the roles of the man and the woman in that period, and challenge those to some extent. But yeah, this film, it has some interesting visuals, but ultimately, if the reveal and the story is dumb, that aspect will sink the whole film. And I do look at these kinds of films, even with Jordan Peele's films, I do kind of worry that it's going to be dumb. M. Night Shyamalan is the king of like plot twists just being disappointing and the stupidest thing ever. And this film could easily go down that direction because it does feel a lot like its style of a substance. I think the acting is pretty good and it's very believable. And like I said, once again, some of the visuals and the concepts are unique. There is a sort of creepy vibe, but I'm not seeing this film being, something eye-opening or really disturbing. It just seems like it's just going to have like we got to open the room to reveal it's a bunch of people watching us kind of situation. But yeah, no, it looks good. I hope it's good. But yeah, I thought I'd mention that trailer as well. Next one I want to talk about, and this is where we kind of go from weird to a little bit more comedic. And I know this is going to upset some people when I talk about the Obi-Wan Kenobi trailer, which dropped on May the 4th, Star Wars Day, who gives a shit. Yeah, this film, getting my stuff mixed up. This series looks cheap as hell. Like, why do all of Star Wars or Disney's Star Wars shows look like crap? Like, after The Mandalorian, did they just like lose the budget, or were they not willing to put any money into these things? Because it looks cheap as hell. Not awful, but just cheap. Like, I could do better with more money to some extent. But yeah, no, this series, actually, I will state this first. Obviously, I've said it once, and I feel like I say it almost every year, or once a year. I don't like Star Wars. I've never been a fan of it, and I doubt I ever will. There just isn't anything there for me personally. If you like it, good. Me, I don't care. But a character I actually do like is Obi-Wan Kenobi. I think he is an interesting character. I think he serves a lot of relevancy to the original good films, and I think Ewan McGregor plays the role pretty well. I think he is believable as Ben Kenobi, or whatever you want to regard him as. But the thing here is that this series, it looks melodramatic as hell. Like, it looks like they're going to try really hard to make this as epic or as dramatic or as emotional as possible. And yeah, I know he's an important character, like I've already said, but really, I really doubt it needs to be like this. I think its tone is all over the place. I honestly would have liked something a little bit more methodic and thought-provoking to some extent. Maybe something more in line with some of the other smaller episodes of In the Mandalorian, or so I've been told. But yeah, and the fact that this woman is just like screaming or like talking about him is just hilarious to me. Like, I can easily see her performance or her character easily just destroying the whole series, because that's the last thing I really want to see in a Star Wars show, is an angry woman screaming about how much they don't like a person. Yeah, that really screams sci-fi opera to me. But of course, they had to tease Darth Vader at the end of the trailer so that all the fanboys filming their reactions lose their collective shit upon seeing him, and so that all the clickbait websites can overhype the series with speculative articles about, did you miss this thing in the corner, and oh my god, it's going to do this, and blah blah this, blah blah that. And it's annoying because basically, or how at least Disney or other people regard Star Wars, is it's essentially just lightsabers and Darth Vader. That's all it is. And you know what? If you want it to be just that, fine. I'll go watch something else. But the last trailer I want to talk about is going to be for Weird, the Al Yankovic story, which I'm guessing is going to be a sort of parody of the more recent trend of music artist biopics like Bohemian Rhapsody, which was on Queen and Freddie Mercury, Rocketman, which was on Elton John, and there's even a film based on George Michael now, which is coming out quite soon, which I didn't look that great, so I'm not bothering to talk about it here. And this, on the other hand, should be more satirical and surrealist in terms of just how it's going to go about. Even just some of the scenes, it seems like it's going to tell a very loose, true story to some extent, or at least that Weird Al himself is kind of had a hand in some of the creativity and production in terms of him just being like, oh yeah, that'll be funny if I did this or didn't do that in some sense. And I like the idea of fans who actually are a big, fan of Weird Al Yankovic watching this film and going, is that true? Did he actually do that? No, that can't be true. I know Weird Al was weird, but no, that can't be the case. So I do like that sort of funny, poking fun at element that this film could potentially have, much like his 1989 film UHF, which is a fantastic film. If you've never seen it, it's well worth the watch. And I don't know, I guess the elephant in the room is Daniel Radcliffe himself as Weird Al Yankovic. Radcliffe suits the role weirdly well, pun intended. He looks like him, and I'm interested to see him or see how he's going to perform as a more odder and comedic character. He does look like he's owning this role, and it is very odd to see him behind like such an overt 80s mustache. It's a really great visual on its own, I must say. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to this film. It doesn't really spoil too much, and it is really funny to hear his song Like a Surgeon kind of play over the trailer. It's great. It's a bit of a shame that it's on like a network that I'm not even sure I can even get access to in this country. I don't even remember its name, but I just remember being like, oh, who the hell's this? But hopefully it gets like a wider release and it is at least good. I know there's like, for every person there's a streaming service, but it is getting a bit ridiculous in terms of where all this content is and how much it's going to cost. Thanks, Netflix. But yeah. And I guess I'll say this one really fun fact about Weird Al himself, and that is that he always asks if he can parody a person's song. He doesn't have to, but he does out of respect, which is just really admirable, and it's something I've always liked about Weird Al Yankovic. He's just a chill dude at the end of the day, and it's kind of nice that he does get his own film to some extent, but we'll see how much of a film this really is. For all we know, this could be some weird social experiment about like the artistry of music and legacy. Who knows? He's secretly a little bit of a genius, but he doesn't brag about it. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up this podcast. It was short, but that's just because I've been really busy. There were other trailers, they weren't really interesting me, but at the same time, there just really hasn't been a lot. News has been slow. I think because of the state of the world, not everyone is really willing to release their trailer and hype it up because they have no idea what kind of reception it's going to gauge, and people are just being very careful about how they go about things. Yeah, it's a bit unfortunate, but I am hoping to do the next podcast 192, with a friend. That'd be a really nice change of pace. I feel like since this year started, it's just been my voice, and I can understand if some people are quite annoyed by that. I'm sure a lot of people follow this podcast to hear other opinions, not just mine, and I would love to have more people, but it just doesn't really work out right now. Things are just a bit tricky, and everyone's like schedule is just a bit odd. For example, one of the, people who does frequently appear on this podcast, essentially whenever they're working, I'm free, and whenever I'm free, they're working. So doing a podcast with them is near impossible right now, but things can hopefully change, and maybe we'll be able to get a few more podcasts with other people featured on it, but we'll just have to see at the end of the day. But I guess I'll end this podcast with the video of the episode, which is going to be from Flume, featuring Maya, I believe that's how you say her name, with Say Nothing. A really creative and interesting music video, a little bit weird and creepy to some extent, given how they've done and how they show some of the visuals. I don't really want to spoil it. I think it's a great song as well. Flume is definitely, his music's progressing a little bit more in a, I'm not going to say generic, but more mainstream light to some extent. But I think if he's able to produce songs like these that are, crowd pleasers for both aspects of, his more old school or hardcore fans and, newer, more mainstream listeners, then more power to him. But I definitely wanted to share this music video because I think it's really well done, and definitely check out the making of / behind the scenes of this music video if you are curious, because it is a very interesting insight to how they achieved a lot of the things that they did in that music video, because once again, I don't want to spoil it. But yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up this podcast. I was the Angry Raccoon, and I will see you on the next podcast.